With that, welcome. It's March 1st. It's Mardi Gras. So I hope you guys got some good stuff, good food in today. With that said, I'm gonna see Frank or Antwon, which one of you would like to go first?
Doesn't matter to me. I can go if you like.
All right, well, we'll let you go first, Frank.
All right, give me 1 second. I will start sharing.
And welcome to the new people. By the way, this is being recorded, so that will get posted up on our YouTube channel later. So if you have people who are interested but didn't get to join, please make sure you pass this along. There's a link in the chat, and then of course on the Meetup page you can also find, links to our Slack channel. So yeah. All right.
All right. Well, hey everybody. Dad, thanks for giving me a chance to present today. I can't see everybody's face, so if you're making a really disgusted face at what I'm presenting, I won't be able to see that. And here, I'll make this a little bit larger for now. I'm going to be kind of juggling windows, so I'm doing this in windowed mode today. I'll introduce myself in a second, but the topic we're going to discuss today is reviewing privileged access in Azure Active Directory, Azure, and Microsoft 365 using PowerShell. Kind of a mouthful, and we're going to cover a broad swath of stuff today. But I think this is pretty important. It's certainly near and dear to my heart in terms of some of the work I do professionally. And I'll take you through this topic today. Real quick intro to me. I'm Frank Lesniak. I'm a senior architect at West Monroe, and I lead our Microsoft 365 consulting team. I also lead different interest groups internally, called out the PowerShell one. There's several others, though, as well. These are sort of like internal meetups at West Monroe community groups, essentially, internally. This is a Chicago meetup, and so I like to highlight that I'm a board member with DuPage Animal Friends. So DuPage is the county immediately west of Cook County, which is where Chicago is. And DuPage Animal Friends really directly supports the DuPage County Animal Services Organization, which is an open admission animal shelter, one of the largest ones in the Chicagoland area. So I always like to mention that in a local event like this. I think many people heard me nerd out about video games and Raspberry Pi in the last session, so I won't bore you about that, but just know that I'm into that stuff, and certainly not a tech-related thing, and I stink at gardening, but I do have a Chicago native plants flower garden, so if you want to check my GitHub, I actually have a repo out there that lists out native plants for the Chicagoland area, another local thing I'll mention. So with that, enough about me. Let's get into the topic. So today's agenda, I want to just start with motivation. Why are we talking about this? Why is this important? And then we'll get into reviewing both Azure Active Directory and Microsoft 365 privileges. You'll see that those are sort of tied together, one and the same, in other words. And then separately, we'll talk about reviewing Azure privileges and different ways to go about doing that. So motivation, I just kept this really simple. Know it, secure it, make it better. So my whole thing is, and the reason this is so important is I have a lot of clients. My team does a lot of cybersecurity remediation work, and I don't mean that as a sales pitch. My point is just that we constantly get into environments and we're doing things like enabling MFA properly and enabling things like Defender for Office 365 and all these different Microsoft platforms that are quite great. However, sometimes what's missing, clients sometimes want to throw the tool at the problem versus necessarily thinking about and operationally paying attention to their administrative footprint. And it's just so important because if one of these administrator accounts in the organization gets compromised, that can lead to a much escalated security incident, including deletion of data, data leakage, reputation loss, and all these other things that we worry about in the cybersecurity space. So, before you start spending a lot of time and money and energy at securing your Office 365 or Azure environment, you really have to understand what that administrative footprint is. Once you understand who your administrators are, right, and you'll see that this is not always obvious, but once you understand who they are, then you can take action to properly secure them according to the use cases you're trying to protect against. So things like privileged administration workstations or secure administration workstations, you can start enforcing the use of those if you have those going in your organization or want to spin them up, if you know who the administrators are. If you don't know who the administrators are and don't have a good handle on it, you're not going to really be able to enforce the behavior necessarily, as you'll see in some cases in this presentation. And, really what we're trying to do there initially, once we know who the administrators are, we want to apply some rudimentary security controls like MFA and other types of things like that. But once we apply those rudimentary controls, that's when we can start making it better. And so that hopefully resonates and makes sense. So before I get into things, I just want to make a disclaimer. Technically speaking, I have no cybersecurity certification. So I'm here talking to you about a cybersecurity matter, and I'm talking to you about AzureAD and Azure and M365, but I am not a certified cybersecurity professional. I just want to mention that. Amateur hobbyist, however you want to say that, right? But the other thing is, it's impossible for me to cover every single cybersecurity concern in a presentation like this, certainly of this length. I actually gave a talk at a client who paid for a pretty large engagement, and it was several hours on this topic. And of course, we're not going to cover all of that here today with you all. So I'm kind of scratching the surface here. Not going to cover everything, but even if I intended to cover everything, there's things I don't know, things you don't know, sort of the unknown unknowns that we're going to miss. And so there's no way for me to cover and convey all the things you need to care about here in this presentation. So with that, now that I've sort of discredited myself, let me recredit myself and get into how I would review AzureAD and M365 privileges. So first of all, we want to cover built-in roles. And these are really if you're familiar with administering Azure Active Directory and M365, these are the roles that you know about and are probably on your radar, like global admins. Most people know that global admin is like the super admin in these environments, and you want to minimize the number of people in the role because they have all of the privileges. So before I get too far into it, I just want to kind of share, there's a lot of these, and this slide is a point in time snapshot of what I would consider the administrative roles in Azure Active Directory and M365, but there are more. There's some are not on the slide because I didn't necessarily consider them to be an administrator. We'll talk about that, but I just want to kind of show that there's a lot of these. So stepping through these roles manually and listing out who's in them would be a pain in the butt. And so you can kind of see where PowerShell is a good use case here because we can query these, we can get the results of the query formatted in a way that we would like, and then we can dump those results to CSV or something like that. I highly recommend, we're not going to go through an end-to-end process here for how you would go about, inventorying this footprint for your organization, but I highly recommend, building that process out and then getting it down to more of a science where you can do this weekly and do so efficiently. If this is scripted out well, this shouldn't be an arduous process. I would hope you should be able to do this, unless you're in a super large organization. You should be able to do this in an hour or two's time and fit that in each week. One thing to note, you see the asterisk here on the slide. Global administrator is the term you would see if you went into the Azure portal. But know that when you're looking in PowerShell, it's labeled as company administrator. So just know that that is the same thing as global administrator. All right, with that, let me pop over. This is where I'm going to make this presentation window a little bit smaller. And I'm going to be juggling some windows here. We're going to be using PowerShell. I hope that's legible. Please say something if you can't read this. I can make it larger. And then I've reduced my resolution here. We're going to be using VS Code as kind of a cheat sheet. And I didn't do everything I said I would do. I got to open these links. I'll do that later, but you'll see me opening some browser windows too. So first of all, I'm going to go ahead and set my execution policy. I think most of you probably know this, but by default in PowerShell, you can't just run scripts or modules. You have to kind of relax that. And everything I'm running here is sort of a known trusted module in script, so I just put it in bypass mode. By the way, scope process is nice because you don't have to run PowerShell as administrator, and this command basically always works, regardless of any group policies or your administrative rights or lack thereof on the system. So this is the command I usually like to run. We're going to import the MS Online module. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention something. Notice I'm in Windows PowerShell here, the good old blue, blue background, right? Old school Windows PowerShell. That's intentional, and that's because I'm relying on a couple of different modules, one of them being the MS Online module that I just imported, that needs the full .NET framework. So if you're on a Mac, I'm sorry, you're sort of out of luck here. You won't be able to do this on your machine. You have to use a Windows machine, or you can use Cloud Shell, I believe, to do a lot of the things we're doing today. So anyway, so I'm on Windows PowerShell intentionally. I've not launched the, the quote-unquote PowerShell core version of PowerShell, PowerShell 7. Here I am in good old PowerShell 5.1. So I've imported the MSLI module. I'm going to go ahead and connect next. And this is going to launch an older authentication flow where you're going to see, this is actually an Internet Explorer window getting rendered here, even though I'm on Windows 11. And I'm going to enter my administrative credentials. See if I can type my password correctly. And then I'm going to get an MFA prompt, so I have that configured correctly. Okay, I just approved it. That should continue in a second. There we go. So now we are connected. The first thing to do is I'm going to run get msol role. And you might say to yourself, Frank, wait a minute. Why are you running this older, somewhat crappier module? Sorry, no offense to the authors of this module. I'm sure it's great. You might be wondering, why am I running this older module when there's newer ones available like AzureAD or the AZ module, even more preferred? The answer is, if you run similar commands in those two modules, you will not receive all of the administrative roles. As far as I know, good old get msol role is the only way to receive every single available role in AzureAD and M365. So if you want to check everything, you have to use this older module. Kind of stinks, but that's where we're at. So let's do a count of these, because I actually don't know how many of these there are offhand. 84. There's a lot of them. So you're not checking these manually. There's just too many. Okay. At least I wouldn't. But I mentioned earlier, right? Like, not all of these are necessarily administrative. I mean, you have to kind of evaluate these for yourself. But personally, I wouldn't consider Knowledge Manager to be an administrative role. Yes, it can make changes. I believe this is for Viva Topics. So yes, this person in this role can make some changes in the organization, but not changes that I would consider administrative in nature. So I don't really want to track the membership of this role as part of my administrative footprint. Again, you may think differently just relative to your own organization. So definitely review this list and decide what is important to you. For me, I want any role that has the word admin in it, in other words, administrator, anything that has engineer in it, anything that has operator in it, and then global readers and security readers, mainly because they have access to sensitive information and can be used for reconnaissance. So if those accounts get compromised, they can start reviewing security logs and maybe looking for vulnerabilities in the organization. So those are additional roles I want to track. So if I run this, we're going to get, oops, I had some text selected. Let me do that again. If I run this, we're going to have fewer roles, but still a lot, of course. But essentially, this is the list of roles that I'd want to track. So I'm going to go ahead and store that in a variable. Just rerun the same command, just storing it this time. Because what I want to do is look at just one of them, the first one in the array. And that's company administrator, which, remember, I said was the same thing as global administrator. So this is the most important of all of them, for sure. And just like anything you're poking around with in PowerShell, I think it's helpful to always do get member. You can see all the different methods and properties available. So this role has a description. You can see whether or not it's enabled, which doesn't really make sense to me. Its name and its object ID, which are probably the most important ones. You can also, of course, view information about the role by doing format list, and you get this back. Makes sense. This is our global administrator. And then if you want to see who's in the role, I can run this nifty commandlet, get msol role member, and I have to supply it with a role object ID. So that's this guy here, this 62E90 blah, blah, blah. This is what I'm going to basically pass in. So let me just run that manually here. I'm just copying and pasting. And I can list out who's in Frank's global administrator. This is my test tenant. So you can see I've got a few different accounts in here, break glass admin, and a couple different other accounts in here. But if I want to do that for everything, we can use a for each loop, or we can pipe to for each object. And and basically get the member of any single role. I think this might look the same in my org because I haven't really done much to customize my directory roles. Let's see, this does take a second because it's hitting every one of those, 70 or so roles. Yeah, and it's the same list. So anyway, from here, what I would recommend doing, because you're going to probably, in a larger org, you're going to have many, many of these. And if you're touching every single role, remember, some people might be in multiple roles. You might get people being doubly listed here, which could be confusing. And so ultimately, what you're trying to get down to is a list of accounts. And so you can get a little creative here and do a for each object. Hopefully, I don't screw this up because I'm typing it live. You can do a .email address, and that's going to give you just the email addresses, of course. And that's going to take a second to process. What I would recommend doing is probably sorting that, and then once you have that, you can then pipe it out to a text file or a CSV. So that, if you run something as simple as what I just shared on the screen, and you dump that to a text file, and you compare last week's versus this week's text file, you can check to see if your administrative footprint has expanded at all. The one caveat is that this is going to list, if you have a group assigned to one of these roles. So for example, if you have a security group assigned to global admins or company administrators, then this is going to list that security group, and it won't necessarily list everybody in the security group. So you've got more work to do to get down to a list of individual users, which I think is really what you want in this case. So I'm sort of waving the magic hand and glossing over that, but this is at least a start as far as checking that footprint. So hopefully you're with me there. So we've covered the first thing, which is built-in roles. Next, I want to talk about this implicit partner access bit, which is something I stumbled across doing some research in this space recently. And it's kind of scary. I'm not going to read this article top to bottom, but basically what this article is talking about is if you've provisioned your tenant via a Microsoft partner like a CSP, and you went through an authorization process like what you see on the screen, whether you know it or not, or whether you realize it at the time or not, you've granted anybody that partner organization designates, in certain roles within their own organization, you've granted them access to your tenant. Specifically, you've granted people potentially as global administrator or help desk administrators. These are both very serious, like elevated roles, especially we talked about why global administrator is important, but help desk administrator can do things like reset passwords. So this is also a very sensitive role membership. But you could say, Frank, we're here to talk about PowerShell, not security, and that's true. The thing that worries me about this is there's no way to query this via PowerShell, as far as I know, unless there's some update made to this article recently, but I don't think so. Essentially, let me show you. The only way to really view this is if you sign in with a global admin account, and let me get to the right browser window. Here we go. And you pull up this specific page. Now, I don't have any partners configured on my tenant. Notice this is empty. But you basically have to get to this page and see if you have partners listed in order to determine, have you granted a third-party administrative access to your organization? So this is kind of scary, and I guess I'm giving folks that are administrators of M365 or AzureAD tenants some homework. Please check this and just make sure you're comfortable with what's listed here. Note that, and this article talks about it as well. If you do have a partner listed here and you aren't really comfortable with that partner having administrative access to your tenant, then you can remove the relationship on that page that I was just shown. You can remove it from here. If you do that, it doesn't necessarily have any real impact to the partner unless they are in fact acting as an administrator on your behalf. So some partners, if you're a really small business, you might be picking up the phone and calling your Microsoft partner and saying, hey, Jim, I need you to create a new user. Here's the user information. And, Jim at that partner organization would go ahead and create that for you. So obviously don't remove the partner if you're leveraging the partner for that use case. On the other hand, if the partner organization is just supplying you with licensing and nothing further, then you can safely remove them from this role as far as I understand. And the article seems to say the same thing. So I wanted to share that because, you could be doing your PowerShell queries all day long and miss this tremendous maybe vulnerability or concern in your organization, which is that there's a third party whom you have no control over or nor visibility into that has administrative access to your tenant. Stop me if anybody has any questions, and I'll stop at the end as well. But I don't want to miss one if anybody has any. So just go ahead and chime in if you do. And if not, I'll keep going here. So the next thing I was going to talk about here, assuming there's no questions, is role eligibility in Azure Active Directory privileged identity management. So not going to go too far into what privileged identity management is and how it works, except I'll kind of pull it up in the portal here. Let me go back here. So if you have Azure Active Directory P2 licenses or equivalent, you basically are eligible to use AzureAD PIM in your tenant. You do have to make sure that you've got sufficient licensing to use this, but if you have one license in your tenant, this feature is available. So you can click into it and poke around. Essentially, this feature does a few things. I won't go into all of those today. You can do things like access reviews and some other things, but really, I think the most interesting feature with regard to this talk today is you can provide what's called just-in-time access to folks. So if you have an administrator and you want that administrator to not always be a global admin, but you know that maybe 10% of the time or 1% of the time that person may need to be a global admin in order to do their job, or some other role, exchange admin, right? Whatever it is, or something in Azure itself, right? You can make the role assignment what's called eligible for that person, where they have to go in and sort of like check out the role in order to do the administrative work that they're intending to do. So, for example, if you have an administrator in your organization that might need to maintain, some exchange settings, but they rarely need to do that function, you can make them eligible to be an exchange admin and have them go through a checkout process. And you can make that checkout process sort of a workflow where somebody needs to review that request and approve it before they can become an exchange admin. So it's like MFA on steroids in some ways, because of course you need MFA. Hopefully you need MFA to get to the Azure portal. You can configure AzureAD PIM to require MFA even if you're already in the AzureAD portal. At the time you're checking out an account, so you can kind of gate the process with MFA. But then also you're kicking a request off to somebody else to approve it, right? So so you're involving another person, which is just another layer of security. So this is a great feature. I'd say a lot of clients are just getting started with this, but certainly something that should be considered if you're eligible to use this as part of your administrative footprint. So that's a long spiel. I hope that makes sense. And probably some of you have seen this before. So I'll keep going here. Before we get into using PowerShell too much, I need to talk about these two modules, AzureAD versus AzureAD Preview. Many of you are probably using or at least are aware of the AzureAD module. It's popular and it serves a lot of good functions. Unfortunately, there are no AzureAD privileged identity management, it's a mouthful, AzureAD PIM capabilities in the AzureAD module. You have to use the preview module, even though these commandlets that I'm going to show you today were added to the AzureAD preview module like back in 2019. That they are still not released to production, even though there's been many updates to AzureAD along the way. Kind of a mouthful there and a long story, but I guess the key thing is if you need to go from using AzureAD to AzureAD preview, it's kind of a pain in the butt because you really should uninstall the AzureAD module. And if you've never gone down the adventure of uninstalling a PowerShell module, I would wish you good luck and Godspeed. Kind of half joking, but the PowerShell Get module is they're sort of on the cusp of releasing this version 3.0. I think it's on like preview 11 or something. So they're moving along in that process, the development process of releasing the new 3.0 version. In the meantime, we've got version 2.0 installed by default in Windows, even on Windows 11, and it's buggy. And at least on my computer, and at least several others, because I was googling the errors when I ran into them, you basically can't uninstall a module. You have to first upgrade your PS Get module, or excuse me, what's it called? Not PS Get. Shoot. I'm having a brain fart, sorry. The module that's used to install other modules. One of you might know if you want to come off mute and correct me. Anyway, you have to update that module. Sorry, what was it? I heard you come off mute there. Mickey, did you say something?
No.
Or Mikey? No?
Nope.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Anyway, yeah, so you have to update that module first, then you can uninstall AzureAD, and then you can install AzureAD Preview. It's quite the process. And to be honest, somewhat embarrassingly, it took me a couple hours to figure out how to do this cleanly. So I don't wish that upon anybody, but just know that you do need to go through this process to get to the AzureAD Preview module if you're not already there. Once you have the correct module, you can connect, and this connection command looks the same as the regular AzureAD module. So these really cannot coexist, at least not cleanly. So again, because these modules don't really talk to each other or share authentication tokens, I'm going to re-authenticate. Okay, once I got to approve the MFA request. Okay, we're there. That's, I think I do have to authenticate one more time later, but then we'll be done with that. So the first thing I want to do is get AzureAD tenant detail. This just lists out, I've already got it here after I connected, but this is just a good practice or good command to know because it lists out your tenant ID, which we're going to need to query the what am I trying to say? The eligible role assignments in AzureAD PIM. So let me actually store that tenant ID here. Sorry, I'm doing the wrong command. There we go. So I'm just going to store that in a variable because we're going to use it here. And the next command I'm going to run is this get AzureAD MS privileged role assignment. AzureAD PIM is sort of like bifurcated. You have an Azure Active Directory version of PIM, and you have an Azure version of PIM, and they're all in the same portal. So they're all back, over here. But you'll see things look different as you kind of dive in, and really these are treated very separately within this portal. So Microsoft's trying to stitch these two things together, but they do feel very separate, especially in PowerShell. So you have to tell it what provider ID we're working with. In this case, it's AzureAD, and you have to give it a resource ID. Let me just get this command pasted, and I'll talk about it a little more, just easier. You have to give it a resource ID, which in this case is the AzureAD tenant ID. Sort of weird because you would think that if you specify AzureAD roles, it might just know to use your current tenant ID, but your account can also be in multiple AzureAD tenants or have permission to multiple AzureAD tenants. So I kind of see why they require the ID. So we're going to run that, and I just dumped those results to variables, and I'm going to go ahead and list those out. So they look like this, pretty cryptic. So like, I don't know, this is great, you got some output, but you really can't do anything with this, especially if our mission is to determine our administrative footprint. This really didn't tell me anything. But one thing you can notice here is it's listing direct and active assignments and direct and eligible assignments. Active assignments are the same thing as what we were looking at with get MSOL role. So those are, in other words, that's a permanent assignment in an AzureAD role. Whereas eligible is more of this just-in-time access that we were talking about. So what we can do is just show the privileged roles where the assignment state is not equal to active. So this gives us a more succinct list, in this case, just one. That's all I've got going on in my my little lab environment here. And I'm just going to replay the AzureAD tenant ID, and notice that that is the same as the resource ID. So the resource ID here, I guess not surprisingly, matches the AzureAD tenant ID. So we've sort of translated the first thing on this in this cryptic output, which is the resource ID. Next, we probably need to figure out what the role definition is. The role definition ID is, excuse me. So we're going to run another command. This is a different one. Get AzureAD MS privileged role definition. And again, kind of a long one. Provider ID needs a resource ID, which is going to be that tenant ID again. And we need to supply the ID number, or the ID GUID, excuse me, which is this guy here. So if I run that, I can see, oh, this is just directory readers. So somebody is eligible for this like kind of BS directory role for directory readers, which again doesn't really do anything unless you block people's ability to read the directory. By default, everybody can read the directory, so this is sort of a nonsense role assignment. But I still haven't determined who has this role assignment. So to do that, I'm going to run get MSL user with this subject ID up here. And I can see that it's my colleague, Aiden Greenwald, and it's his administrative account that I stuck in this. It's eligible for this directory readers role. So I didn't build a process for you all that's like top to bottom here, but you can kind of see how, I should say you can envision how you can get all the privileged roles for Azure Active Directory. You can probably do a for each object loop, or I should say you can pipeline a for each object on those. You could then process the role definition ID and the subject ID for each one and get down to a list of people and eligible role assignments. So this is something that's possible, but sort of, as they used to say in college, an exercise for the reader. But one thing to note about these preview commandlets, this is probably the reason they're in preview, by the way. These are all subject to a 200 object query limit. So if you have a larger organization with many people that have eligible role assignments, you cannot run these commands and return more than 200 results because it'll just cap you at 200 results without warning. So that can catch you off guard and maybe cause you to miss things when you're sort of doing an audit or a review. So that's not super easy to work around. Just want to bring that to your attention. It's something that you'd have to manage through. I think the main workaround, and Brad, I saw you're on, you'd probably like this. The main workaround for that is to use the Graph API. You can also get a little bit creative and probably do more succinct queries, but that's not exactly straightforward. To basically manage around that 200 object limit. But again, that's going to be kind of tough to manage against. Okay, let me go back to my slides just to guide the conversation. So we've just gone through top to bottom, how to like look at least from my perspective, how to look at AzureAD and M365 privileges to determine your administrative footprint, within these two platforms. All right, so I'm going to keep going. Next, I want to talk about Azure, the platform itself. And the first thing to look at is what's called a role assignment. So a role assignment is basically a permission granted within the Azure platform. So to a resource or a set of resources in Azure. And to do that, we're going to use the more modern AZ resources module. This one you could run in PowerShell 7, which is great. I'd like to see more of that, but because we're going to be using some other older commandlets, mostly out of my laziness in this case, I'm going to stick in Windows PowerShell here. So first thing is I'm going to import that module. Many of you probably know that, but to install this, you would normally install AZ, just AZ full stop no dot resources, and that would install the whole suite of modules and submodules, and that's fine, you can do that. But if you then import module AZ, that takes a very long time because it's importing a lot of modules. So this is the most succinct way to do what we're going to do today. So instead of waiting, a couple minutes, we had you wait like 5 seconds. And then I'm going to do connect AZ account. And I did want to just mention this really important flag for scope process. If you don't supply this flag and you connect to Azure using this module, you could be creating a security issue for yourself. So if you go over to your user account and you've ever used this module, you have this nice Azure folder. In my case, 350 something megs or whatever. If I were to connect to Azure and not supply scope process, my authentication token would be sitting on disk. So if my machine is compromised or somebody else gets access to my machine and they steal this folder, like literally if I connect without that scope process and copy this folder and send it over to one of you, you are admin Frank Lesniak. Like you don't have to go through MFA. You're me and you're in. So super important note, to highly recommend, unless you're on a special privileged machine or something, you should really be using scope process here every time you connect. Sorry for the soapbox, but I think that's pretty important. So let's connect. I'm going to pick my admin account. And it's going to warn me that there's more than one subscription. And you can see that my default subscription is this do not use pay as you go. I labeled it that way because anything I put in here hits my credit card. So, I try not to use that unless I have to. So what I'm going to do instead is list out my subscriptions. I think I have 3. Yep. And I'm going to use one of the partner network ones. So I'm just going to use set AZ context to set that as my active subscription ID. And then I can list out my AZ role assignments. In this case, I'm just going to limit it to the first 3 because I don't want to show certain people's email address who aren't here today. I don't want to put them out there unnecessarily. So these are the first 3 role assignments in my org, and depending on the size of your org, you may have hundreds or thousands of these. I've certainly seen that. And again, you saw earlier that I have multiple subscriptions. So to do this, you would theoretically need to hit all of your subscriptions, or maybe management groups if you're managing that way, and do a get AZ role assignment across all those. So there's potentially a lot of these in an organization. And one more thing. You might sort of think like everybody with a role assignment is inherently an admin, and that could be true, but there's a couple of legitimate reasons that regular users would need a role assignment in Azure. Again, depending on your organization, how you're using Azure, but the 2 that come to my mind are if you're using Azure Files shares, kind of weird with the double plural there, but Azure Files has a file share feature. Many of you may be familiar with this, and in order to grant the equivalent of like NTFS permissions, people need to have and access that share. People need to have a role assignment in Azure in order to do that. So that is a use case, where you could have regular users doing regular day job stuff that have legitimately have a role assignment in Azure, and you'd want to, of course, like exclude that from your administrative footprint review. Another one that is fairly common is using Azure Bastion for remote access. So Azure Bastion, people think of that as an administrative tool, and in many cases it is, but it could also be a legitimate way that you might want a regular user to maybe VPN into a VM or a virtual desktop system. Again, there's a lot of ways to do that, and I'm not saying this is the best way, but it's certainly a way to do it that I've seen used. So if that's your setup and you're using Azure Bastion or have regular users using Azure Bastion, know that all the things that go along with that, like access to the destination VM NIC, that's going to have a role assignment, and there's a couple other things there. So those are other reasons that a regular user might have a role assignment. So that's just kind of an FYI there. But to get down to a list of all the role assignments, you can do something like what's on the screen, but not exactly what's on the screen. What I would recommend instead of using display name is probably the sign-in name, right? Because that's a unique identifier, whereas display name is not guaranteed to be unique. So in this case, I'm going to get all the role assignments. I want to get down to a list of people. I don't necessarily care, in my case, what level of access they have, but rather just who are the people that have administrative access. And I'm doing display name to hide people's email addresses. So I'm going to do that and select unique objects and sort them alphabetically, and I get this list. So my admin account, my colleague Shelby's admin account, my other colleague named Frank, his admin account, or his regular account, excuse me, a couple of my accounts, which have like BS safe assignments. Like you can see, I added my Hotmail account here just to show that you can actually have external people that have role assignments in Azure. So that's something to watch out for. MS PIM is a default thing if you have PIM enabled, and then you can also add groups here. So I just want to kind of show that. And again, if you have a group, you're going to have to expand that group membership and get down to a list of people in the group. So there's, again, an exercise for the reader there. So that was a lot. I'll keep going here. The next one is very similar to what we already did with AzureAD PIM. So again, remember that AzureAD PIM is bifurcated. You have AzureAD in there, and then you have Azure. And so in this case, we want to query Azure resources. So to do that, you need to start by getting a list of resources in Azure. And keep in mind, this commandlet is limited to 200 results. So any sizable organization is going to have more than 200 Azure resources easily. And so you can run into a query limit here. In my case, I don't have more than 200 resources in my freebie Microsoft Partner subscription. So you can see some of the ones I've got listed here. And I guess one thing to note about this commandlet, you might be wondering, well, Frank, why aren't you running get-az resource? And I could. Oops. The trouble is you're going to get different IDs in this case. Sorry, I didn't actually do that correctly. But the point is, if you get down to resource IDs using the AZ module, those resource IDs are not the same thing as the PIM resource IDs. So that is pretty frustrating, at least from my perspective. You really have to run this query through the AzureAD PIM module to get down to a resource ID that is known to PIM. So in this case, I'm going to zero in on this Microsoft Partner Network subscription, which is kind of a top-level role assignment place in Azure. So I'm just going to store that resource ID in a variable. And I'm going to go ahead and, I guess I mentioned this already, but just a note then again that resource ID is not the same thing as the resource ID itself. So this one starts with 9821 according to PIM, and it almost looks like I'm trying to spell leet here or something, but B337, that's what the real resource ID starts with in Azure. So those are not the same. Let's see. So what I want to do next is go ahead and get the privileged role assignments for this resource ID. So this is going to look pretty similar. I need to give it a provider ID, and in this case, Azure Resources is the name of the provider ID. And then I need to supply it with the resource ID. And remember, I stored it up here. So just giving it the resource ID. And this is going to list back a lot of stuff. Here it is. Right. We saw something similar when I was querying all the different roles in AzureAD itself. So in this case, I'm going to very similarly exclude those that are direct assignments. We only want the eligible ones. We've already queried the direct assignments through a different method, more convenient method. So let's just show the ones that are not, actually that should say not direct. Naughty Frank, I had a typo there. So if I do that, oops, sorry, hold on. Maybe that was right. Sorry, 1 second, I screwed that up. Yeah, okay. So we want assignment state not equal to active. Is that true? No, that's not entirely true. We want member type. No, assignment state, that's right. Not assignment state not equal to active. Why did that list so many things? Didn't I just do this? Oh, okay, I must have missed, sorry, brain fart. This is what we want. I did have it correctly. Whoops. Anyway, eligible. So we have one eligible role assignment. And again, we're dealing with the same cryptic noise here. We know that the resource ID is the subscription that's in question, because this is a direct assignment, not something that's inherited from a management group or something like that. So really the question is, I guess, what is the role definition here? Like, in other words, what is the privilege being assigned? And for subject ID, who is the person with the role assignment? So I can do, let's see. I don't think sorry, I didn't list the command out in my cheat sheet. So get ms, let's see how badly I screwed this up. Sorry, hold on. Get AzureAD, my fault. Privileged role definition, I'm going to supply the provider ID, which is Azure Resources. And I'm going to supply the resource ID, which is this guy here. And I'm going to supply the ID of the privileged role definition ID that we were wondering about, which is this guy here. Oh, geez, what did I do? Add request. Privileged role definition, that looks right. Role definition ID. Huh. Sorry, folks, I screwed that up, and I don't have a cheat sheet note on this. What did I do wrong?
It looks like you have the. Oh no, I see. Resource ID. Never mind.
Huh. Provider ID is Azure. Oh, I mistyped resources. Wow. Okay. This is one of those things where you would hope that they wouldn't use a literal string here, and they would let you like tab complete and an enum, like a set of possible values here, but they don't do that. Still didn't work. Okay, well, sorry, that's not working. I must have screwed something small up. I'm sure I'll look at this in 10 minutes when I stop presenting and realize what I did. But anyway, that normally you would run something like that to determine what the privilege being made eligible is. In this case, I think it's like reader or something, I want to say. And then, of course, similar to what I did before, you can run get MSOL user or something similar with an object ID to find out who has that eligible role assignment. So this is very similar to AzureAD, but it's a different approach. The last thing I wanted to show to just round us out here is this like very sneaky way that somebody can be an Azure administrator. So, you might think, oh, I've got separation of duties in my organization, and my global administrators, they can only administer the directory, but then I've got other people who are, administering Azure. And like in theory, that's true, but in practice, there's a way for specifically global administrators in AzureAD to basically get access to Azure Tenant. So this is actually super useful if if you've got people spinning up rogue Azure subscriptions in your organization, because all you need is a credit card to spin up an Azure subscription, right? There's nothing stopping somebody, at least not until recently, I don't think, from spinning up an Azure subscription on their own using their credit card. They can still be in your AzureAD tenant, right? But spinning up their own Azure subscription. There was no way to really discover those unless you had some sort of access to it. So so this implicit access method, and I'll put this in the chat after this after I stop presenting, because I don't have the link handy, but I'll link you to this. There's a way to sort of elevate yourself within AzureAD. Actually, I might be able to show it to you because I think I remember where to do it. So if you're going to do this manually, you could go to Azure Active Directory. Hopefully I don't screw this up. We're going off script here. I think if you go to Properties, and if you scroll down, here we go, Access Management. So you have to be a global admin to do this, but if you click Yes and then click Save, this is basically turned on effectively God mode, where you can then see every single subscription associated with this Azure Active Directory tenant. So if somebody's gone rogue and spun up that Azure subscription in your org on their own credit card, this lets you discover it. And then because you become an Azure Access Administrator, or Azure Access Manager, I think that's the name of the role assignment, something like that. You can then modify permissions. So from there, you can start granting yourself access to that organization. So FYI, this is sort of a backdoor way to get into Azure. That could be useful, but also just know that anybody who's a global administrator, meaning directly in the global administrator's role, or potentially, having implicit access through your Microsoft partner channel, or eligible to be a global administrator through AzureAD PIM, all of these folks are effectively administrators in Azure. So that's kind of a gotcha. If you're doing an administrative footprint review of both AzureAD and M365 and Azure, you're going to catch this anyway. But if you're just reviewing Azure, you can easily have this blind spot and miss this potential for escalation. So that was a lot. I guess I wanted to hopefully walk you through this quickly, and keep in mind this is recorded, so Thad, we'll make this recording available to you all if you want to spin through something I covered later. But I hope that this sort of whirlwind tour of what to consider when you're doing an administrative review is helpful. And hopefully I've shared a few things with you that maybe you didn't know, because some of these are sort of like gotchas or things that aren't obvious. And certainly being that my company used to do cybersecurity incident recovery, following like a ransomware event, we've seen situations where like a managed services provider gets a security compromise, and then lo and behold, what do you know, other clients do as well. And I'm not saying that this was the method of escalation, but it's a possible method of escalation. So you want to definitely be aware of and manage some of these gotchas in your own organization. So yeah, so that's it. Thanks for listening. I will stop sharing, and I will take any questions before I hand off the mic. If anybody has any.
I do. I'll start off with a question, which is, you talked about the difficulties in sometimes getting the list of users within the different groups. But can you go the other way by getting the users and seeing what groups they belong to, or what privilege groups they belong to in that way? Because I
You
doubt
could.
that you're going to run into that 200 item limit for groups or roles, though it's
Okay,
possible, I'm sure,
got
in
it.
some instances.
So Ted, you're thinking more of the AzureAD PIM limitation then?
Yeah.
You probably could. I haven't messed with that, but I suppose you could probably apply a filter to that commandlet where you're basically saying, show me only the eligible role assignments for the person with this GUID, or the identity with this GUID. And I guess, yeah, if you step through all of your identities and did that, that could be a possible workaround. It would take a long time in a large organization, but in a smaller one, that could be feasible. So yeah, I guess that depends on the org a little bit and how long you're willing to wait, but that could be an option. Another way I was thinking about it is, you could probably apply a filter to the query itself and saying, say only show me the eligible role assignments. I don't need to see all of them, because the direct role assignments I've already gotten those via other easier methods. And don't get me wrong, AzureAD PIM is nice if you're doing in the portal access review. It does have some nice features for that. But
Yeah.
I sort of feel like that's amateur in a lot of ways. Like, that's fine, I guess. But like, if you're really not technical, I guess that's fine. But if you're doing this on a regular basis, you got to automate this. Otherwise, you're just going to be wasting a lot of time. And I don't think anybody wants to stare at spreadsheets all day long. It's easier to get these results into something you can readily compare to last week's results and determine what changed. That's how I look at it. Good question. Any others?
Somebody had a question in the chat, Dave.
Oh, okay.
When and where will the recorded session be available?
Dave, if you look up at the top of the chat, you should see a link to our YouTube channel.
Right on. So that's the where. Feb, when do you think it'll be posted?
Hopefully sometime tomorrow. I've been actually pretty good about anything we've recorded throwing this up as quickly as possible.
Awesome. And I'm just going to mention it. Clem responded and helped me with my brain fart earlier. PowerShell Get is the name of the module. Thanks very much. I'm just saying that because I don't think that the chat will necessarily be visible in the recording. Thanks for that. Okay, any other questions? If not, I'll give Antwon the mic. Okay, well, I'm sticking around, so if you have a question, go ahead and post it in the chat, or we can maybe chat at the end of this if you think of something.
All right, Antwon, give it a go.
All right, thank you, Frank. It's a little hard to follow that up. I probably should have went first, but
you're good, man. Don't worry.
So I think I'm going to kind of focus on a little bit of .NET 6. So I'm not going to get super deep into it because you start venturing into HTML, CSS, JavaScript, SQLite, a whole bunch of things. It technically, basically what I'm going to do is just kind of focus on setting up like a specific project. Maybe you want to do a web app, web API, desktop, and then explain a little bit of the differences between .NET 6 and like a .NET framework for the most part. So I'll share my screen. Okay, so we're doing .NET and PowerShell. Once again, my name is Antwon Garcia. I'm a desktop systems engineer for DRW. I am a Air Force veteran, one of the co-organizers with Thad and Frank and a few other people as well for the Chicago PowerShell Users Group. I don't know why I have a bachelor's of electrical engineering, but I do, just in case. My Twitter is blankman660. I just made that up probably like a week ago, and it has no post, no anything. I think maybe I might have retweeted a pair of PowerShell slippers, and that's about as good as it gets. And there's a link to my LinkedIn as well. If you find me on there, feel free to send a connection. So we're going to talk about .NET 6. So here you can quickly Google .NET 6. for a download, and just for a quick download to download and install. So there's two types of downloads for the most part. There is the .NET runtime, and then there's the .NET SDK. So if you're planning on developing, you're going to want to do the .NET 6 SDK for the device or machine that you're going to be using to do any kind of development. And then the runtime is if you already developed the application, but you need another machine to be able to run that application, you will put the .NET runtime onto that device in order to run it. Quick, simple install. Of course, you're going to need to be admin to install it, but it's nothing super crazy as well. PowerShell commands. So we're just going to blow past the installer and everything. So you downloaded .NET 6. You have the .NET 6 SDK. You have it installed onto your computer. So you want to verify that the .NET 6 SDK is installed. So if you run the command .NET -- version after it's been installed, it'll tell you what version of .NET 6 you actually have. And that kind of goes along. That's kind of important, especially when you start to develop applications, because you will need to kind of line up that .NET version with certain add-ins or NuGet packages that you want to use with your application, with your web app, with your API, etc. Also, so there's some slight differences between .NET 6 and .NET framework. So .NET 6, before it became .NET 6, it was .NET Core. So then you have applications like ASP.NET Core, you have Blazor, Razor. All these applications can run on .NET 6 or the .NET Core. And essentially what that means is you can use this application in certain situations, because not all libraries would be available on like a Mac or a Linux device, like the Active Directory libraries or modules. So you can't access the Active Directory directly with those, but you can still do like LDAP, and you can reach out to APIs, those kind of sort of things. But for the most part, if you use the .NET 6, you can install .NET 6 SDK and runtime on multiple platforms. So you can use it on a Mac, you can use it on Linux. So you can develop on one platform and use it across many. So you may want to develop a simple desktop application that may reach out to a API and give out and collect certain information and display that information. You may want to use it on a web app where every day you may have certain information stored into an Excel file, JSON, whatever have you, and you may want to show it on an internal website or something, or make an internal application through a web app. That's one of the things that I'm working my way towards. I'm not like a .NET guru per se, but not even per se. I'm just not. But it is definitely something that can be very useful. So to start off, I would like to just explain a little bit of it. So I was running some commands earlier. So if you do .NET -H. So this will give you a list of the available commands for the SDK that you can use to run right after you put in the command .NET. But for today, we're going to make a ASP.NET Core Razor page web application. So we would do .NET new, but then I don't know what's supposed to come after new. Once again, you can go down the rabbit hole with help. So another .NET new -H, it give you a list of commands that you can run as well, but that's not the commands that we're looking for. And so, this will give you a couple of extra commands that'll help you, but the bread and butter is right here. So .NET new -L, if you run that, it'll give you a list of templates that you can use to generate whichever kind of application, or even parts that can go inside that application. So you may want to put in a class library. You might want to make a ASP.NET Core Web API, Blazor app, class console application, WPF desktop application. You know, the list is right here, and you can do quite a bit. But we're just going to do a new Razor web app. So I would do .NET new Razor -H, so we can see what's the next thing I'm going to want to do. And what's awesome about this is comes with some other like pre-built in things. Like you can set up your authentication. So you have to be a Windows user in order to authenticate. You can create your own I guess, like identity server or whatever, or, you know, so you can have, if you use individual, when you set this up, it'll create its own database of users. So then you can have users add themselves into this database and it not be attached to any enterprise or any, you know, your company or whatever, wherever you're working. So that's another nice thing. And it'll install, I believe it is SQL Server Express and SQLite. So you can use either or database in order to store user information, or when you develop your application, you want a place to store your information, you can store it inside of a database as well. So, but we are not going to really focus on any kind of authentication, but that's right here. So you have the individual, which will create a database for your users. I'm not super sure about the AzureAD B2C. I've never used anything like that. You could do single sign-on, multi-or in Windows. And Windows is usually pretty nice, but the default is none. So .NET new Razor. And then there is so the -O-N. Okay, so .NET new Razor, which is the type of the template that I'm going to use, and -N for the name. We'll call it CPSUG Razor app, and we don't even have to do -O because it'll just build the folder right here. Actually, we will do -O. We'll output that folder right in this repo folder. Nope. Capital O. Okay, I took out the O. And we check this folder, and there it is. So we'll change over to that. And so another thing that's cool about this .NET framework, or .NET 6, you can run all your commands from the command line from PowerShell. And I mean, if you are, very, I guess, good with VS Code, that's fine. You can hold your control and hit F5 to run the debugger and everything. But use F8 to select your line. But I'm just going to do first, I'm going to change to that folder. So code.-r. And now what that's supposed to do is open up that folder in a new window. So now what we have over here is our whole project that was generated from the .NET 6 new Razor command. And it's the CPUG Razor. So let's give that a run. And if you're not familiar with VS Code, in order to open up the terminal or the console, you hold Control and you hit the tilde button, and your terminal will pop up. And then all you have to do is run .NET run to run your application. And yes, we want to add our C# extensions to there. And usually, as like a disclaimer, as always, it always takes like a second for the first build. So it'll take a few seconds, but usually not that long. And we have a web app. So this is an internal web application. So it's using the local host. And we'll just go ahead and go to that site. And here we are. So this is a Razor page. And you can go and you can modify this to your heart's extent. And this is just blank, nothing. And yeah, I can show you how to modify this. I won't get too deep into that because I know this is Chicago PowerShell user group. But here's all the pages. So you have an index page, you have error pages, you have a privacy page. We can test out the privacy page. We just click privacy, take you there. And then you can hit Control C to stop it, just like any other PowerShell command. So that's one application. I would also like to show you the Blazor, which Thad told me about like a while ago, and I never got like super deep into it, but you need to know quite a bit probably to make it the way you want it. So just going to back out one folder and we'll .NET new Blazor, .NET new Blazor -H. And new dash L. And I'll bring this back up so I can see which Blazor. I'm not going to get deep into it. Well, okay, I guess I will just a little bit. So you have two types of Blazor applications you can run. There's a Blazor server that runs server side, and then there's also the Blazor WebAssembly app that actually runs on the client machine from the client side as well. But we're just going to do a quick server app. .NET new Blazor server -n, we'll call it CPSUG Blazor. Okay, and so we'll change directories and run it. These look way more better than just a blank Razor page as well. But so this is your Razor application, your Blazor application, and it's already, I believe this is Angular. So you can go through here and it's already interactive. And if you are good at Angular, or it's either Angular or React. If you're good at either, I think it's Angular, but if you're good at Angular, this is also another pre-built template for the .NET that you can use in order to build Angular web apps as well. Okay, so we'll close that. And then we will go back to just a Razor page, and then I'll do a little bit of modification with that.
What was that?
You have to excuse that. That's my son and my wife. Share space, you know how it goes. So we are doing the Razor page right now. So in here, these are your pages. So Razor pages, usually you could just create a single page and create a endpoint so that users could go directly to that page. So just for instance, we go here, you have the /privacy endpoint that you can reach. The home is the index endpoint. So that's automatically by default where your page is going to land. Whenever somebody first comes to your website, if anybody clicks home or anything, this is the first place. This is the index page, and the first place everybody's going to land. So what we want to do is just create a new .NET new Razor page. .NET new page. Pages. Name, we'll call it I don't know, because I'm not very original. CPUG. Thank you. Is that a note? Okay. Okay, so we just created a new Razor page. So we have the Razor page by default. There's 2 files per page. There's I guess you could say the CS HTML, which is like the visual side of it, and then there's the underlying code part of it. And basically, they both work together whenever you are creating a web application. So you can program whatever happens in the background, and you can still design up front as well. And so we'll just do. Okay. And that is just that easy to create an extra page on your web app. So you can get as fancy as you like with the web apps, with the Razor pages. They also have MVC, which is the model view controller, and that's usually more. You want more control of your application, but some of us were not that advanced, so we would just like to make the simple things, and then you can modify even more. So let's say, for instance, I want to add this CPSUG page to the list up here. So if we go back to there's not a concept, but there's a shared layout that goes between every single page, and depending on how you set it up. But for the most part, by default, it goes to every single page. And so this is like, granted it's bland, but this is the layout going across every single page. And you can find that if you go into the pages section, share layout. And over here, you will see your CSS and HTML all together, and this is just like the default layout for everywhere. So we want to change the default layout, and we want to add that CPSUG list. So if we highlight the old index one and copy and paste it back in there, CPUG, and then we'll call it CPUG, save, .NET run. And so now it's here, click it, and it works. So now you got easy navigation. It's not super bad whatsoever. It's, but once you start getting into the C#, that's where you got to start kind of knowing what you're doing and reading everything. The program.cs, they've changed it from what it used to be. There used to be like there was the program.cs, and then there was a startup page as well, where you can configure all your services, your dependency injection, and everything. But now it's just basically everything is now inside program.cs, and they made it even simpler than what it was. But here, this is where you got to start doing some reading and getting into how to build, how to maintain or modify your Razor page web app or whatever. And then you can also mix and match these as well. So you can have like an MVC application with Razor pages in them, or vice versa, and even the same for the Blazor as well. So that's another nice thing that I myself personally kind of like about ASP.NET Core, or .NET 6 framework. But as I mentioned before, it's cross-platform. You can use it on MacBooks, Linux. You can create desktop applications, web applications that can be used across multiple platforms. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Just a quick, simple kind of overview of .NET Core or .NET 6 and PowerShell and some of the things you could do. And so the way I did the Razor page as well, when I added it using the .NET new Razor page and I named it, you could also just do like new dash item to that pages directory and then just call it Antwon.cshtml, and you can create that page, but it won't automatically create those pages for you. Also, there's another cool thing as well. Scaffolding. You can scaffold CRUD. So if for those who don't know what that is, that's create, read, update, and delete. And so it'll automatically generate those pages for you for certain things. And it also incorporates EF Core, which will automatically migrate, not automatically, but it will migrate your model into a database as well. So it will automatically build out your database with like the ID and certain parameters or whatever, whatever you like. It's whatever you like or whatever you build it up on. Let me see if I can. I have an example. So here's a little bit of what I had been working on. So this is one of the Microsoft tutorials that has like it uses a SQLite database in order to create your application. So if I go through open data, I think I just saw it. So this is a Razor. This is a Razor page movie. If I run this, scratch that one. One. So my son's name is Eli, so I was kind of showing him some stuff. But these are movies that you can do. This is a movie tutorial for Razor pages, and if you look here, so I was speaking of CRUD earlier. So there's your create, there's your delete, there's your edit. And then the index is just the landing page. So if I do /movies, that's the first place it's going to land, which is this page. So I want to create a new page. And then we can and then automatically creates the movie and adds it to the database. And so here, using a SQLite Explorer, I can see what movies are in my database. I can look at my ID, title, release date, and all of this using the tutorial. Use the model to build it, and then ran EF core migrations in order to map this model to a database in order to begin saving things into that database. So it's a lot of like neat and cool tools that are already a part of the ASP.NET Core or .NET framework. So that was my brief and simple demo of ASP.NET, ASP.NET Core, .NET 6, and the things that you can do with PowerShell and .NET 6. not a super long one, but that's my presentation. Any questions? I didn't know I slid all the way underneath the monitor either.
I was going to joke and say you're on mute the whole time, Anton.
That would have been great. We've all just been sitting in silence.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry that wasn't super long. Kind of figured something that I've been working on and learning, and I thought it'd be nice to share some of the information that I've come across and some of the cool things that you can do with it. That's like I said, that introduced me to Blazor, even though I have not used it like I really want to. But it's a lot of cool stuff out there.
Yeah, that's cool. I haven't messed with that myself, but neat to see it.
I do have a question. I don't. Does you're building a web page? Is there anything built in to the framework that handles security, or would you rely on the functionality of the IIS service to handle security, or do you not know?
So yes, there are multiple options for security. You do not have to depend on the built-in security features within ASP.NET Core. You could use your identity server. You could use Azure as a place of source of authentication. Yeah, so it's definitely, you don't have to use that. And then you can also use like security packages. If there's something that you prefer to go with, you can always install that as well and use it in conjunction with ASP.NET Core. So it's a nice little framework if I can learn how to use it. So
Anybody else have any questions?
oh, nice. It's Days of SQL Server DBA. So that's nice.
It's cool.
All right. Well, it's almost 6:30 here for those of us here in Chicago. I know I can't remember your name, who's using your phone. I know you're in North Carolina, so I know it's closing in on 7:30. With that, I'm going to open up. Anybody have any requests of topics they'd like to see coming up? Or anybody interested in presenting something, or anybody interested in being involved in some way, shape, or form? It's always tumbleweeds when you ask these questions.
Yeah.
The mic is open to just talk. Like, we don't have to. It's not like a formal thing or anything. I'm pretty sure most people all figured that out by now. But yeah, if you have any questions, maybe that you would like maybe for us to take a look at, or anything that you might be excited about, any kind of technology, not even necessarily PowerShell.NET related. Spread the wealth.
Yeah. For the people who are still here, I know some of us are experienced. I don't know where everybody sits, but those of you who are remaining, is anybody like early on in their career or looking for like mentorship or trying to build up their skills? I'm curious where people sit right now. Man, those tumbleweeds, man.
I'm not early in my career. I'm always trying to build skills, though. So.
Yeah, I was about to say the same thing.
We should all be trying to build skills, I guess. It's always
that's definitely something. Always looking forward to learn something new. So appreciate the presentation, guys.
Anytime. Well, happy that you could join us. Welcome to the Chicago PowerShell Users Group as well.
I think Clem is trying to say something, but like the mic keeps flickering for. Oh.
No, I was just going to say I've been in IT for 25 plus years, and
So
doing
you're new to
PowerShell
this.
for 10 or so. But these meetups have been great to sort of pick up ideas and things outside of the box. My day-to-day IT work is pretty limited on its use of PowerShell, but it's something that I enjoy doing just on the side. So, hearing about AzureAD and also, just being ready in case the job market calls or whatever. It's just great to have some of these opportunities to stay out in the know and see what's coming with like the new versions of .NET. I mean, I remember the first release of .NET, if that says anything. So, to see what you can do with Razor and Blazor now is pretty incredible. When I started with basic and classic ASP. Just to give a level set there. I look forward to catching some of the other ones, that come up just to learn new things.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome as well. And if you feel like you want to share some of those skills that you accumulated over the 25 years, that would be awesome as well. We always looking for guest hosts to come on and share their knowledge as well with everybody else. So.
And I know Cisco isn't on here. He said he'd help get us some people too. I wanted to get us back into a rhythm, back into the swing of things, and then start getting guests. And try to keep up the podcast and get guests on there too, as well, for quicker, shorter discussions of things coming up or what they're working on. Or technical topics or even non-technical topics.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been a little while since we've done a podcast, but you had some things on. So
like I started off with, the last couple of weeks been really rough, but getting back in the swing. So there'll be more coming up soon. And I'll have this jump into the podcast feed as well, so that people have portability. I like portability. I like options.
I know one thing I'm kind of looking back into getting into is Pester. I keep saying it, and I need to do Pester because being able to test and not in prod is probably one of the best things ever. And then you can set up how you're testing, how you set up your test to what parameters or what functions you want to test out and expect to have returned to you, what kind of information you expect to have returned to you from setting up Pester tests. Like, those are one of the best things, definitely, in my opinion, to learn. So I'm a little excited about getting back into that as well.
Yeah.
Well, I think I told you both in the last meetup that I'm pretty excited for some upcoming conferences. So I'm going to MMS, double MS in Minneapolis, in that area, which is focused more on like systems management. They have an automation track and a security track, and so it's a really solid conference if folks haven't been to that. So I definitely recommend it. There's also the PowerShell Summit coming up in April. I'm not going to that because that would be 3 weeks of conferences in a row, and I just can't do that. Plus, I figured the more times I roll the dice, eventually I'm going to get COVID and have to start missing stuff. So that doesn't, like, I can't do 3 weeks in a row of events. So, sorry. And I guess I'm going to the MMS event conference. I'm also going to West Monroe, my employer, summit in the week after MMS. So that's the two. But I had to cut something, and unfortunately, PowerShell got the cut on my end.
Yeah, in my case, at least right now, the only conference I have planned is a Python conference, PyCon, at the end of April.
Where's that then?
That's in Salt Lake City.
Okay, nice.
So yeah, I know we're talking PowerShell, and I'm going to a Python conference, and the first thing for those of you who don't know, I am now a software engineer. I was a system administrator for, gosh, 15 years or so at varying levels, and including managing a team for a while. And then I moved over to a software engineering role. And of course, the other people on the team mocked me because for years I mocked them for using Python, and I'm a PowerShell guy. And now they tease me all the time because, I feel like such a noob in Python and make all kinds of rookie mistakes in Python. And it's like, you should know not to do that because I do it right in PowerShell every single time. And yet I make all these careless mistakes in Python.
So Fed, are you like using that for like automating software deployment? Like what's the use case for Python for you?
It's for internal infrastructure tools. So my team builds tools for other teams within infrastructure here. Now, that doesn't mean I don't use PowerShell, and I actually will. I need to put together a presentation, but I have one where we actually have a Python Flask app that in one of the functions, it then sends data up to SharePoint. And so I did a variety of things and had some fun with that. And so I will probably talk about, building up pages and working with lists a bit, as well as showing a couple of things with regards to that. And of course, my frustrations, similar to you, with dealing with stuff in Azure and things being obfuscated in very frustrating ways.
Mm-hmm.
Like how many layers do I need to go through to get the thing I get to what I need? But yeah, so I still, there's other PowerShell tools that I built and work on within the team, and I am the only Windows, Microsoft PowerShell guy on the team, which makes it interesting when we get to topics, we get to projects that are like, hey, we need something and it works on Windows, and then the first thing everybody wants to do is like, all right, I got this Python app, and like because of my experience in the environment, I'm like, you can't use Python, right? You want to build something, it goes onto client computers here in this company, you can't do Python because, you got trade team A, they've got Python 2.7 tools running, and you can't force them to change no matter what, right? You got team number 2 over here, they've got their a version of Python with very specific modules, and this other one's got Python, and then you're going to write an app and it's got to work on all those versions of Python where it doesn't exist, and then you have to also force Python onto all these other machines that don't have Python, right? Because Windows doesn't speak it natively. I know there is a tool, I can't remember it off the top of my head, which will wrap up Python apps as EXEs, much in the same way that PowerShell Studio will wrap up PowerShell scripts as EXEs. I have not experienced this, but at the same time, it's not just a matter of can you wrap up and package this Python app, but also a matter of like, one project that's come up is like a help button. There's still talk about that, right? But a help button, and the manager who wants this, he's like, I want users to be able to click this, a form pops up, they fill in like the form, with like, here's my problem, and then hit submit. That submission then submission would then do is create a ticket in whatever ticketing system, and we're we're in the process of changing ticketing systems, but submit a ticket. Within that ticket, not only is it the description of, hey, what's wrong and who it's coming from, but also pertinent information about the machine this is coming from. You can do it in Python. It is ugly. It is clunky. It is slow. So yeah, I can write it in C# or I can write in PowerShell. And the reason I would defer to PowerShell in this case over C# is the number of people within the company who can work on PowerShell versus the number of people who can work on C#. Those are very, if I were to leave, right, there are like 4 people in the company that would comfortably be able to do C#. They are doing other things. They are not going to have time to go fix an app written by somebody else if there needed to be a change. On the other hand, PowerShell, and Antwon knows this, I managed the desktop team for a few years, and one of the things I drilled into their heads was learn PowerShell. Because that was going to make their jobs better. That was going to make their value better. That was going to make them better technical people. Yes, there are other languages. And I also apply, like, if you didn't learn PowerShell and you learned some other language, that's just as good, right? This wasn't PowerShell specific, but we did your environment's 85% Windows. PowerShell has more value than Python. But am I going to, no criticism for Python. If somebody's learning it and builds tools with it, I wasn't going to complain about that either. But it was about build, make your life work smarter, build more automation. Let's solve problems for tomorrow's problems, not try to figure out what happened yesterday. So that was the thing I drilled into them, and Antwon knows, and that's why he heard me talk about Blazor, because that was a dream. It's like, let's bring Blazor into this. Let's build tools off of Blazor, and it didn't happen under my time. Anybody who's been a manager knows full well there's no time. You can have all the dreams you want, but you either have to have the people doing them or you have to do it yourself, and it's hard when you're not able to do it yourself. And you got everybody doing all kinds of things, and you keep throwing down dreams to the team, and they're like, but we don't have any more time for this.
Yeah, it's hard to shove all those dreams in the time, that's for sure.
Yeah. I won't say failures. I just say we kept, you just have to prioritize whatever dreams you've got, right? It is what it is. All right, guys. It's been a pleasure. We should be doing one in April. Now that this has been brought up, I may bring up my SharePoint / PowerShell and Linux mixed in with Python kind of project that I did, sanitized so that I don't get in trouble with the powers that be because I'm showing off company secrets. But yeah.
That help button.
What's that?
That help button that you were talking about, is that like cross-platform, or would that just be like on a certain?
I'm gonna look into it being cross-platform, but I think on the Mac environment there's already something, and that's what prompted something for Windows. And Unix people are assholes. I'm sorry. And I'm saying this.
Hey.
Okay, let me explain this to you. All right, Mikey. It's that a lot of the Unix users, certainly in the environments I've worked in, they always think they know the answers and they've got solutions and they can fix everything, right? And then they come to you later and they come back to you later and they say like, I don't know what happened. I can't log into my computer anymore. Oh, you did rm --rf on your home profile. Great job. Great job, dude. You know, like at least on Windows users, you're coming in, at least for Windows users, a lot of people come in going with a couple of different ideas. One, yes, my machine always has to reboot. Yes, something's going to crash. Yes, I don't know how that works, right? Like there's a lot of that on the Windows side. So people are accepting of the fact that somebody has to come and give them a hand, right? So it's not a matter, it's more a matter of like who's coming to the, Unix users are just coming to the door thinking they know everything. And they're no different than Windows users in the grand scheme of things, right? They come in all shades, and they don't know everything.
Nobody knows anything, or wait, or everything,
No.
something like that.
Yeah, but it's a matter of like how, the level of acceptance of help and how you treat the people who come to help you, and that's why I criticize Unix users. As a
I
general
would
group,
say
yes, there
that
are some good.
Yes, there's that ignorance over my years I have seen happen in multiple platforms.
Yeah. No, there are obviously these people in Windows. There are definitely these people in Mac. As my 15 years of experience, those Unix users are a whole different level. They come into a company and, they've come into my companies and they've been like, oh, you don't need to explain to me. I know how to do it. Right. And, every company is going to be different. Their environment's going to be different. You may say like, I know how the OS works, but then, one of my companies, they didn't allow people to have admin rights on Linux. Now, and then you get some dude goes like, I know what I'm doing, give me admin rights. And you just sit there and go, no. Then if you knew what you were doing, you wouldn't need admin rights. And also more importantly, for a secure environment, I can't give you admin rights. I don't know you. And I don't know what you're going to do to screw things up. Plain and simple. Right?
Yep.
But if you
yeah.
if you know what you're doing, you know how to do all these things in your local profile.
Yep.
And that is that's a skill that some people just don't have, right? Now, I don't criticize Mac people in the same way because Mac doesn't have that same local profile conceptualization that Windows and Linux have. Everything has to be done under an admin context, and it's annoying. From an IT administrator standpoint, Mac is very frustrating because it opens the door to insecurity. I do not believe in people having admin rights. Straight up.
There's I've never had to admin Macs since way before 10, like the 90s. But yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing the operating system as an operating system, right? I will criticize how they built it and then how third-party developers of apps handle working within it, right? Because they both work together, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know, if the third party says like, oh, this is just being used by Johnny, right? Johnny's not in a corporate environment. He's going to have admin
Yeah.
rights.
Yeah. There's the whole since 10. Yeah. There's been no, actually, even before 10, even some stuff in 9, it was not built for the corporate environment.
No, and they're trying to get in, and I wish they would understand like where administrators sit and how it, you know, how they're trying to manage things.
Yep.
You know, and Windows is still easy, and I know they're trying to chase that same tail, that same dragon that Mac is, right? They want to give people that same kind of experience, but also, as insecure as people feel Windows is, it's still very secure.
You know, nothing is secure if it's not.
You know what I
configured
mean,
properly.
right? Like it's.
Well, yeah, I know. Yes, Windows.
The
like
potential
Microsoft
is.
Windows is the target because it has been so insecure for so many decades.
Yeah.
Right, and that's what makes the target, and therefore that's why it's out there. You know, and you know, I'll use the term news, but we know what I mean by that.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah. All right. Well, I need to let you guys go.
Yeah, I've got NW Clug.
Likewise.
All right. Good night, guys. See you guys
everybody.
soon.
Yep. Take care.
Everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Right.
Bye.